If their child doesn't have autism, is that a good thing? If their child has autism, is that the bad thing? No, right? And so this is where the conversation, especially when we talk about science and fact and truth, deviates from lies and disinformation and misinformation. When you are on the train of misinformation, disinformation, like this administration is, like RFK is, you can say something so blatantly false and not necessarily have to prove it. You don't have to have any studies or factual thing that backs up like anything you said. But because you have a very loud microphone and it, you know what, they got one of the loudest microphones, it goes everywhere. Hey y'all, Dr. Barry Pierre here. So I've talked about this, gone on record to say that when we list the cabinet members that I'm likely going to have to keep refuting misinformation after disinformation, we ranked RFK at the top, which made sense. He is like the Health and Human Services Director, and you know, a lot of the stuff he says clearly affects a lot of my patients. First of all, just so I can start, they went on this whole kind of secret thing, like secret announcement that had to go down. Like this was some like announcement that like as if they found a cure for some type of cancer, only to tell us that we see a link between Tylenol and autism, stop taking Tylenol. So before we get on to the rest of the show, let me assure you, no, there is no correlation associated with Tylenol causing autism. Let's get that out the way. Like, in fact, this is something that was actually refuted in 2024. Like it's been like, we've been got that out of there. But unfortunately, when you're dealing with an administration that, you know what, focuses on misinformation and disinformation, when your Health and Human Services Director is a big anti-vaccine advocate and who still believes that vaccines cause autism, despite the fact that there is no evidence to show it, this is the type of news conference that you get, right? And I do want to give let me see if I can find my little summary, what went down. So a couple of things. Not only do they attribute this increased incidence, right, of autism, right, to possibly Tylenol, possibly. Now, mind you, they're not committal, but they're like, in the end, they say like, don't take Tylenol, which again is crazy. They also are recommending a medication called Leucovorin. And you may not necessarily be familiar with it. Most people aren't, right? Because most people who have to take it are typically dealing with some type of severe anemia, are using it in conjunction with cancer-related therapy. This may sound your ears may be ringing, right? Because this may sound familiar. Because remember when we were dealing with COVID, they all of a sudden wanted you to take horse dewormer medication, even though none of the study said it would help. The same thing is kind of happening here, right? Where they want you to take this medication like Leucovorin, which is used for patients with significant folate deficiency, especially cerebral folate deficiency, used for patients who are taking cancer-related drugs, specifically like methotrexate, or dealing with significant anemia due to folate deficiency. Because in their eyes, which they do so well, they spray the news with this misinformation, really disinformation about Tylenol being associated with autism. It's not. Then they say, hey, you know what? Take this other drug over here. And then when you find out what the other drug does, they don't actually explain the fact that autism is related to folate deficiency. They don't actually go into that detail because there's no detail to go into. They just say, hey, start taking this medication here. And you know what? We'll see you later, right? Like that is unfortunately like how a lot of families were left. You guys may know I'm also the co-founder of Autism in Black. So of course, not only again as a physician does this hit my front door, as the co-founder of Autism in Black, like it hits the side door, the back door, through the windows, every which way, because and I talk about this especially in the autism community. A lot of parents, especially those who are still having difficulty, accepting the disease, right, of being autistic, right? Like that process. They are always looking for a way out. And when I say a way out, they're always looking for an answer. Like, all right, like how did this happen? Why did this happen? And a lot of times, especially for autism advocates, a lot of the work goes in to helping the patients, the families, like really accept, hey, this is the diagnosis, but this is how we're going to live with said diagnosis, right? A lot of the work happens in the acceptance phase. But when you have something as negligent as, a president of the United States, and again, a woefully unqualified person as your head of Health and Human Services telling you that, you know what, not only shouldn't you get vaccines. But guess what? Like, clear this folate deficiency and your autism would be better if you avoided Tylenol. Like, they're telling you all these things here, and all it does is spur confusion. So today we're going to talk about, separating facts from fiction associated with Tylenol and autism. And hopefully by the end of today's conversation, you'll get one thing. No, Tylenol does not cause autism. No, you cannot trust, our Health and Human Services Director. And you probably can't trust the president either if he's telling you not to take any Tylenol. I knew they were doing some type of news conference. Didn't know what it was for. Like, again, I typically don't, especially for RFK. Like, he's just one where, like, they were already coming off telling people they don't need to vaccinate. I'm already dealing with the state of Florida removing mandatory vaccinations, which we already know what's going to happen. We already know what's going to happen. And unfortunately, a lot of these people will not be in power, right, to see the effects of what's going to happen when it happens. Again, we'll talk about that later. But then this news conference comes and it says Tylenol causes autism. Stop taking Tylenol, right? Like, that's kind of the short and sweet aspect of it. And again, I hark back to even when, we got like our diagnosis for my daughter, right? There was never any question about, oh my God, what caused this, right? How did this happen? Like, there was never any, oh, we have to find the boogeyman. But unfortunately, for a lot of families, this is a real, true, boogeyman of sort, of trying to find a reason, a why of why their child is autistic. It doesn't even talk about those who may be diagnosed when they're in their later ages, teenage years, adults who are diagnosed, like my wife. It doesn't even like mention that, right? Like, just for, and we'll get into, and obviously, I don't try to, especially on this channel, I don't go into nitty gritty science wise, only because I know the majority of people who watch this channel aren't gonna really, understand most of it anyway, and shouldn't, right? Because if you're a good, educator, right, you should be able to kind of explain it at any level, right? So that's really our goal here. But when I start seeing the headlines, right, I'm scrolling, the headlines are going crazy, and my usual suspects, especially those who are about truth, start having to post rebuttal videos, because that's unfortunately where we've gotten to, where we have to post rebuttal videos because the misinformation, disinformation is coming from everywhere. So it's not uncommon, and the usual suspects, did a great job at it. And I'll throw a couple links in their show notes about, with some of the folks I like to follow, especially on TikTok. But I always think about, like, all right, what is going on with that family now, right? Who thinks that, hey, you know what? I have the answer. Now, mind you, it doesn't change the result. It's not as if they can go back and say, oh, see, now that I know it's Tylenol, now you don't have nothing to worry about. No, it doesn't change the end result, right? Their child is autistic. It doesn't change that. But for a lot of them, they've been grasping for straws, looking for a way out, because unfortunately they blame themselves, right? There are a lot of parents, not all, you have to say that. It's weird, especially in this day and age of social media, that if you don't preference that you're literally not talking to every single person, the person who doesn't fit the criteria will automatically be like, oh, no, that's not me. That's not me. No. That's like, oh, gotcha. Not all, right? But there are a lot of families, especially the ones I talk to, who you can tell, right, even without saying that there's some, there's some consternation, right? There's a feeling of, guilt somewhat, right? There's a feeling of guilt. And when now you hear this guy, right, say, hey, like, I think Tylenol caused it, right? First of all, it tells you stop taking Tylenol. Again, don't listen to that, right? Please. Thankfully, a lot, if not all, of the medical associations have come back to refute anything that was said during that press conference. Because this is what you do when you're dealing with disinformation. You really have to attack it head on. But when I think about that family who hears this, right, who sees it on social media, because they're like, they see it somewhere, right? Somehow it gets to them that the President of the United States and our Health and Human Services Director is saying Tylenol is the cause, right? What do you think they do? Right? They start looking around like, should I still keep taking Tylenol? Right? That's a question, right? Like, how much Tylenol? When did I get the Tylenol? Right? These are questions that you would think someone who is in the position that an RFK is in would be able to justify when you make such a statement. right? Because there's this aspect, and I talk about this all the time, right? This causation, like what caused something versus like a correlated, like, oh, it just happened to be. Is there a possibility that a mother who is pregnant happened to take Tylenol during their pregnancy? Sure. If they had a fever, had some pain, sure. Especially because you typically can't take anti-inflammatories during pregnancy. So it makes sense that Tylenol would be the pain reliever of choice. If you have a headache, a fever, makes sense all in the world. Is there a possibility that that same mother who happened to possibly take it has an autistic child? Yeah, sure. Right? That's a possibility. But does that mean that the Tylenol they happen to take cause their autism? No, right? And you don't have to take my word for it. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. I'm going to put a link in the show notes because y'all know I love to put the sources, right? Because that's one thing that other side doesn't like doing. I actually love putting sources in. We combated this conversation like a year ago. Like there's a whole article in 2024 that talked about like, hey, you know what? We're going to look at all of these families. We're going to ask them to recall like, hey, do you remember taking Tylenol? Like again, because it's not like no one's writing down, tracking like, okay, you took Tylenol on October, like no one's doing that, right? So the families have to recall whether they took Tylenol or not. They have to recall when they took it, how often they took it. Like these are things that just have to kind of like almost like memory recall. And then they have to say like, okay, right? Like especially if you've had multiple children, right? Like did you take Tylenol with multiple children, right? And this is where the argument started to fall apart in the studies, is that you could have a family member who may have one autistic child and have another child who's not autistic. Took Tylenol with both of them. Why is only one child autistic, right? Like that's a question, right? So that's where you start having to really, especially from a scientific standpoint, start putting your thinking hat in. Say, yeah, like a lot of women who are pregnant typically will take some Tylenol, right? Not to say every woman who's pregnant take Tylenol, but a lot of women will, right? And what about the women who don't, right? What about the women who do not, right? Like if their child doesn't have autism, is that a good thing? If their child has autism, is that the bad thing? No, right? And so this is where the conversation, especially when we talk about science and fact and truth, deviates from lies and disinformation, misinformation. When you are on the train of misinformation, disinformation, like this administration is, like RFK is, you can say something so blatantly false and not necessarily have to prove it. You don't have to have any studies or factual thing that backs up like anything you said. But because you have a very loud microphone and it, they got one of the loudest microphones, it goes everywhere. So what tends to happen reflexively, and again, this is why I appreciate, because this is something that did not happen, and I always talk about this, when the vaccines cause autism thing first came out. This is something that did not happen, right? Because most of those in the scientific field were like, okay, yep, that doesn't make sense. The science is not there. We don't think the general public's going to think that, because you know what, we'll get that article retracted, which they did. We'll get that article retracted and have them apologize. And they did all that, but unfortunately, the general public still had people, and we won't name that celebrity's name, going around saying like, "Yep, vaccines, vaccines, vaccines." And decades, and that's decades with an S, decades later, you still have people arguing that vaccines cause autism. So the same thing is going to happen, hopefully not to that extent, with this most recent statement. Oh, Tylenol causes autism. No, it does not, right? But not only we're going to say no, it does not only are we going to publish the studies and say no, it is not, we're going to get on TikTok, we're going to get on YouTube, we're going to get on podcasts, we're going to get on blog. We are going to make sure we refute everything that comes out, right? And you have to do that. The reason why you have to do that is because we know that in this social media age, if we, especially healthcare providers, educators, don't get out there and fight this type of disinformation at the head and in full force, you're going to have people in 5 to 10 and 15 years, if not sooner, say, you know what, I swear off Tylenol, right? No way I'm taking Tylenol. No way I'm getting vaccines because they cause autism. Like you're going to have people say that, right? Because they're not going to have the wherewithal from an educational standpoint to be able to kind of elucidate that, no, you know what? The person who told me this was really a very uneducated, unqualified guy who should have never been in that position in the first place. And he was already anti-vax, and he was so anti-vax, he was put on a list. And I've talked about this before, the Disinformation Dozen, as one of the 12 leading people associated with spreading disinformation. This time it was with the COVID vaccine, right? But like when you make a list like that, and then somehow somehow you are gifted the position to be in charge of health and human services. Yeah, like again, I don't want to say it must be nice, but like unfortunately, that's how the cookie crumbles for some people, right? That you can have the most unqualified person. And trust me, I've seen several people in this president's cabinet. There are a lot of unqualified people there. I was talking to my JAG lawyer friend and a couple of military folks. They know there are a lot of unqualified people within this cabinet. I personally just have to keep dealing with RFK and keep dealing with the mess that he's kind of handed and given us, right? So again, we have multiple studies that have already refuted any claims of, oh, you know what? Tylenol, autism, I don't know. Like we already had the studies that got that out of there. So yes, you are able to take your Tylenol, please. And I don't want you not to take your Tylenol. Because could you imagine if you had a child who's not autistic, right? And now they have a big fever. But now you just saw a post on Facebook or Instagram, someone that sent you, and now you're afraid to give your child this Tylenol for their fever, right? Because you think like it may cause autism. Like that is what's going to happen, right? Again, I wish I could be hyperbolist. I know that's what's going to happen. You're going to have kids suffering, maybe even adults suffering, right? From the fact that they won't even take Tylenol for this boogeyman fear of autism. And it's one of those things where like we're not going to really go into it here more. I'm actually going to do an episode with my wife, Maria Davis Pierre, on her podcast, Autism Black Show, and we'll talk a little bit more about especially from the social construct aspect of it, especially with this black cloud that people walk around with when they say the word autism, right? Like we'll talk about more on her show. This one is more just me getting that stupid BS of Tylenol causing autism out of there. Again, it's not it, right? But I do want to have some time to focus on what they recommended, right? And it's one of those things where, especially as a scientist, as a public health professional, like when you see things like this, you have to ask yourself a lot of these questions, right? So during the press conference, they mentioned this medication that, again, a lot of people had to Google, right? Because it's not a very common medication unless you're in the situations where it's common for, right? Leucovorin, a medication classified as a folic acid analog used to counteract the toxic effects of certain medications, especially methotrexate and folate antagonists, right? So essentially it is a folic acid replacement medication, right? Folic acid is a vitamin, but this one is more the active ingredient. It doesn't have to get activated in your body. This is kind of like the active form of it. And they say, hey, you know what? We think this medication right here, right? We think this will be good for your autistic child, especially if they're nonverbal or not. We think that's it, right? And you have to ask yourself, right? Like, and again, when I see stuff like this, and obviously I have medical brain, I have public health brain, so it's a lot easier for me to do it. When I see a statement like that, the first question I ask is, if you're telling me that I should be taking a folic acid replacement medication, which essentially that's what it is, for my autism, are you now saying that autism is related to folate deficiency? No, of course not. Of course they don't say that, right? Because they can't say that, right? So like, you want me to take a medication that is a folic acid replacement, but not tell me that folic acid deficiency is a cause of autism. Why won't you do that? Right? Because you can't. The same exact energy that you cannot say folic acid deficiency causes autism should also be the same exact energy you should say when you say Tylenol does not cause autism, but you don't do that, right? You say Tylenol causes autism, but take this folic acid medication, right? Like Tylenol autism, folic acid medication to treat the autism. If they're nonverbal, we think it may help. Like, yeah, you should try it. And I won't even get into the nitty-gritty stuff as far as like people having financial ties to that medication. But with this administration, not surprised whatsoever. Wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if that were the case. But I'll just say again here, if there were links, right? And this kind of gets into this aspect of, autism and autism research and, what's causing, this increased incidence at present, what's causing the increase in numbers. We've talked about this before, short and sweet. We're much better at diagnosing it. We're much better at recognizing it. So those who weren't considered autistic are now being considered autistic. Boom, your numbers go up, right? That's neither here or there. But as we continue to move forward, like, yes, I know people want research. I know parents want research. Hey, providers and educators, those who are like ourselves, want the research. So it's not like we don't want the research, but we want the research to be factual. We want the research to be truthful, and we want the research to be able to help families, not scare them. So when you go on and you get on, your press box, and you say something like Tylenol causes autism, you're only doing it to scare the families. You're only doing it to try to steer families away from getting the help they need, from getting the education they need, right? Could you imagine now someone thinks like, oh my God, I just got to get a Tylenol antidote. Like, this is the thought process of some people that are going to transpire now when they hear something like this. So I'm very fortunate, very happy that a lot of the content creators, a lot of the professional medical organizations refuted this immediately, got that out the way. It will continue to do so because this is the battle that unfortunately we're going to have to deal with for the next 4 years of this administration constantly telling us lies, misinformation, disinformation, talking as if it's truth, and us having to get on here and tell you that it's not, right? So I am yours truly, Dr. Barry Pierre. Again, in summary, Tylenol does not cause autism. In summary, a folic acid deficiency does not cause autism. So treating yourself with a folic acid replacement is not going to turn things around. Please seek the help that you need. Like I said, we do have an organization, Autism in Black. I'll put that information in the show notes as well. If you ever need any questions or concerns, but like we're here to help. And we're also here to make sure that disinformation as well as misinformation doesn't continue to spread to our communities, right? To our parents, to our loved ones, to those who are autistic. We're like, that's the name of the game here, and it is what it is, right? Yeah. So I'm gonna see you guys next week.